Hello again, it's the Alco Diesel guy here with my next project. Yep, it's an RS11 Proto 1000. I know this is getting a little ubiquitous with me with these engines, but well, I love them. This particular engine's got an interesting backstory to it. I purchased this as a non-running model. I was told that point blank the motor wouldn't spin, which of course is intrigued, which of course is one of the reasons why I got a good price on this. These would usually retail, as I understand, somewhere just below $100. It's like 79, 80 something dollars, maybe 90 something, depending on where you bought it from. This I managed to get hold of for a very reasonable $44, if I remember correctly. If I remember correctly on this, that's a pretty good price on one of these engines. Of course, it is non-running, so that makes sense to a certain extent. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is try to get this heap running. Pardon me. First step on these projects is obviously to get into the engine. This has still got the plastic standoffs on it. These are the packing mounts, these little plastic thingies. A lot of people have wondered what these are. I've heard people confuse. I know one person on the internet, I think on one of the forums I was on, actually asked why his engine wouldn't run, and someone actually mentioned the plastic, these things as being the problem, although the person didn't understand that. Not that I blame them, it is kind of confusing. Anywho, I'm going to go ahead now and take them off. Oh yes, there's two more screws underneath the cab that have to get yanked. Again, right underneath there, you got two more screws underneath your cab. You're going to do those, and you'll get full access to it. Anyway, what I'm going to do in this video is show you how to get one of these seized motors running again. This is a chronic issue that's been coming up a lot now. These engines are pretty old. They're upwards of 10 years old. They were made back last, I think, in 2004. Being 2015 now, they're getting up there in age. Okay, after some plying with my pliers, I managed to get that screw out. And without further ado, unhooking it, and as we say, it's bone stock. Shockable shock, no real shock there because, well, I happen to know it hadn't been messed with. Here's that mashed up screw. What happens sometimes with these older engines, and this is obviously one of them, it qualifies as, is that because they've been around for so long and haven't been used, they've been in cold and warm environments, temperature rises and drops all the time on them, and essentially what happens after a while is the plastic starts to shrink so tightly around the screws that you can't get them out. What I want to do now is see exactly if this thing will work. And if it doesn't work, well, how to get it going. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and hook up my basic transformer. And even though I was told already that this doesn't move, I want to confirm that for myself. And I remember the seller, not trying to make anything negative, but you have to remember in the end of the day, their job is to sell something, not necessarily to make sure things are, shall we say, up to the exact precise condition. Don't get me wrong, not working is not working, but at the same time, this guy admittedly didn't troubleshoot the engine before he sold it to me, so I don't know what's wrong with it. Okay, unhooking my DCC system, plugging in this analog power pack. Okay, so I'm all hooked up. Let's turn the throttle on and see what happens. And yep, hums just like the seller said it did. Alrighty, so time for phase one of my plan. As you can see here, it's not going forward or backwards; it just hums in both directions. What I need to do now is, of course, to start tearing the engine apart to get it repaired. So I got my screwdriver again. I'm going to go in the top two screws and release them. These again are a little bit stuck to start with. I'm going to need to keep these screws because I'm going to need to use them to remount this engine. The main board in place, because I plan to put eventually, if I can get this engine going, which I should be able to, a sound decoder in here, and I want to make sure obviously that it's is able to be secured. And I need the screw for the type I'm going to be using for that purpose, because it'll actually let me use the stock screws to mount it in place. Okay, we got that out. Now, obviously next I'm going to pop all these annoying little plastic thingies, the wire clips. I have to clean these up later. They get on my nerves a little bit. They're not the greatest connection. This is another indication that this thing really hasn't been really used at all. Again, this engine suffers from this issue, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to find here. That has to do with the grease. What I'm going to do now is, once I get this off, is show you more about it. I have to pull this off. There's just no other way of getting access to it. Believe me, I wish I could leave this on. What I will do once I get access to this is I'm going to hook the motor up directly to my power track and test it that way, so I don't have to rewire everything. Okay, carefully undoing the wires now. not going to reuse this board, so this can be basically thrown out. Keep it to the side. I usually hang on to them anyway. You never know. Maybe someone wants the original board if I sell one of these things ever in the future. I haven't done it yet. Doubt I would, but you never know. Anywho, I can see right now with my finger trying to turn the flywheel that it is jammed shut. This thing is not going anywhere. It is really stuck in there good. So obviously that means I have to tear it further apart. I kind of figured as much. Now I'm going to remove the headlight assemblies. Put them up in my parts box over here, which I have labeled for RS11s. And now I'm going to go ahead and pop the truck tops off, the worm gear covers off. I just need a little flathead screwdriver. Use this little guy right here. A little hard to get in here. There's just a gap on the side. Again, get in there, twist it, and try so you can pop it up. There it goes. It's pretty tough to get this out without breaking them sometimes because the plastic is always dried out on these. In this case, I didn't break it. It's always pop both sides. If it doesn't, no problem. Just go to the other side and pop it up. Actually, it's better if it goes one side at a time. Let me release this other one altogether now. It's really stuck in there good. There we go. Here's the other drive shaft. I hate having to be so brutal with these, but they've been stuck down good. There we go. And the plastic is expanded and shrunk several times. There we go. Here's the other one. Put those right there. And I can... Anyway, that makes things much tighter. Anyway, that was the toughest part, in my opinion, of the whole disassembly process. The other truck is now out. Here's my other drive shaft. So, let's check the motor now and see if it'll rotate without those in it. And yes, it does. So it's, again, what I thought it was and what it usually is. What happens is the grease that was used on these is really crappy stuff, for lack of a better term. It's the equivalent of butterscotch crossed with peanut butter or one or the other. I've now come to the conclusion it's both because it's just so bad. And if we look at this gear shaft here, which is just completely frozen, it won't even turn. And that's because this grease is actually acting more like crazy glue than it is actual grease. So to fix this, I'm going to get a few things together. I'm going to need a wet paper towel and a dry paper towel. I'm going to actually physically clean all these gears off by hand and then put them back in. So hold on one second and I will go set that up. Okay, the first part of this project, or stage of this project, I have my wet paper towel in hand. I'm going to now basically turn this to get it off, and I've got now the gear and bearing. I got the first bearing off the top of the shaft. What I have to do now is unstick the rest of the bearings. This one is easiest to work with because you can just take it off and then clean the shaft itself with your fingers using a paper towel. And you see the difference here. That little green stuff I just took off is not paint. That's actually the grease that was on this shaft. It actually turns to crazy glue, lack of a better word. It just really does not work very well after a good point in time. They say everything wears out, but this particular grease seems to have a real problem with that. It really does not like being on there. Again, the procedure is very simple. I'm getting my fingers on the shaft and I'm just rotating it in my fingers and taking the grease off. Okay, after a lot of intensive cleaning, I'm basically ready to continue. What I did basically is I cleaned all the grease off this. I'm going to have to reapply it now. I'll go through the procedure on how to do that. Let me just also reiterate what happens here. Essentially, this green grease you see here has one disadvantage. In fact, it's got a few different problems. If you're in a very dry environment, or let me just start at the beginning. If you're in a very wet environment, there's a chance the grease will actually, like this one. Oh, I didn't get to this shaft yet. There's a chance the grease will actually, like this one is here, freeze solid. And the only way to get it loose is to physically break it free. What essentially happens is the water particles of the grease dry out, and because this is so water-based and so sensitive to it, all that's left are the chemicals, which are supposed to make it sticky, which are supposed to make it slippery. But when it's dry, they do the exact opposite. They basically act like crazy glue, and the end result, you get a jammed shaft. So what I may have to do is actually soak this. I don't like doing that, but this one is not responding to any of my treatments, and I'll probably have to get a little basin here and fill it with water or whatever, and let it soak overnight to try to free this up. But that's typical of these gears. The other thing that can happen is if you get too much water, which will get us some corrosion. There's a hint of that here. If you look on the side, there's a little rust inside there. It's turned green. And what that'll do is it'll rust shut, because what will happen is the grease will then, if you have too much water, react with the metal and actually bond with the metal. And you'll get the equivalent of a sort of a weld, if you will. Not quite the same, but very close to it, and just about as difficult to break. So what I have to do now, basically, is I'm going to probably have to soak this shaft overnight to fix it. Unless I can try another technique. So anyway, as you can see here again, I can't rotate the shaft with the bearing blocked, with the bearing blocked in one position. How this should be in the engine is this shaft should be held steady. This little bearing here should be held straight, and I should be able to turn this. But as you see, it's just not going anywhere. It's frozen solid. So the only way to get this loose is basically going to be to bathe this in some light soap water, I believe. I'll first try regular water. I don't want to use chemicals because I know they can cause problems with the grease. I've had bad experiences with them. And anywho, and stuff like that. Anywho, this is the shaft that's completed. So let me just show you what the follow-up procedure is. Once you've finally unlocked these shafts, what you're going to want to do then is treat them with oil. I've got some MTH plastic safe oil. Again, you want to make sure you got. I'm going to go ahead now and just apply this to the shaft itself, and to where the bearing is going to sit. The front bearing comes off. The rear bearing you can't get off without pulling the shaft off, and I don't want to do that because it's sort of attached there. So how I deal with this is I push the bearing forward, apply oil behind it, and then I push it backward again and apply oil to the opposite side again. The trick is to get as much in there as you possibly can, because again, this is going to have to spin. Now with the other bearing I have right over here on the ground, I'm just going to go and take my oil syringe thing and just put a little oil right on top of it and bathe it in oil. Again, it's a bearing, it's going to touch oil. I want to make sure that it has as much friction modification as possible, because I don't want it to be literally worn out. What I'm going to also do now is work the oil into this by turning this while it's in there. I can already tell a huge difference. It's spinning very easily now. It was working okay before when I got rid of the grease, but now with this stuff in, it's actually better. I'm going to add a little bit more oil. Sometimes doing this, you'll also get some of the grease to pop out as you rotate the shaft, like so. What will happen is, as you hold the bearing still and rotate the shaft, more of that grease will literally pop out because the oil has caught it and freed it off. If that happens, no problem. Just go ahead and put more grease on it and keep turning it. Anyway, I'm ready to rebuild this particular shaft. I got the bearing protector, which is this almost impossible to see thing. It's this clear piece that a lot of people forget. It's designed to protect the worm gear from the bearings so they don't rub against each other and wear each other out. You definitely want to make sure that's applied. And you get that in there and take your bearing and place it back on and rotate the shaft and see how it works. And this is sticking a little bit, so I'm going to have to go back in it again. It is unfortunate that Lifelike chose such a really bad quality grease for this, because it ruins these engines' lives before they get a chance to get a good home. But if you get one of these Proto 1000 engines and you got the same nonsense going on, my advice is follow the procedure I'm showing you, and you'll get it running. So right now I've just relubricated that, and now as you see now, as opposed to before, I can rotate the shaft and hold the bearings straight, and they will basically turn. That's how it should be. Problem solved. Get a little bit more grease out of this, and basically this shaft is pretty much ready to go back in there. So what I'm going to do now is get more aggressive with this one here, see if I can make it turn.